Thank you. I got a hello. Thank you. My name is Jo Macness. I'm the Chief Strategy and Operating Officer here at the Haas School of Business. And I am delighted to welcome our UC colleague, Dr. Robert Lustig, to this event today. This event is being co-sponsored by a number of different entities. Here at Haas, the Institute for Business and Social Impact, as well as the Dean Speaker Series, and also the Health Matters Wellness Program here on campus. So the other thing that I wanted to mention to you is because we have all of these different sponsors, we have people joining us from a number of different locations. We have people who are viewing on the web. We also have several people in, I think, 3 different viewing locations across campus. So because we're in multiple locations, and welcome everyone here as well as viewing from afar, we wanted to make sure that we hear from you all when it comes to the Q&A session at the end of the talk. And so to that end, we have 3 different ways that we can have you get in touch with us and ask your questions. One way is via Twitter. So you can use the hashtag SugarSavvy, the Twitter handle @BerkeleyHaas. You can also, if you're viewing on the web, there's I think a little form that you can fill out that you can ask your questions. And then finally, the old school way, for those of you, exactly right there, for those of you who are sat here in the audience, we gave you pieces of paper with pencils. And if you want to just jot your question down, pass it to the aisle, we'll sweep through a couple of times and collect those. Okay, so sugar. Why are we talking about sugar today? Well, Sugar is the topic of the day. It's Sugar Savvy Day on campus. This is an event that is sponsored by the Health Matters Wellness Program. They're asking us to decrease our sugar intake for today. They're also asking us to take a leap. It is, after all, a leap year day today. And join them in the 21-day Sugar Savvy Challenge. This means that you get to lower your sugar intake for 21 days straight, not just today. That starts tomorrow, and you can check it out on their website. I know that I'm going to sign up, so hopefully you all are going to do exactly the same. All right, so I think that's about it in terms of the logistics for today. I wanted to turn my attention now to Dr. Robert Lustig. He is a professor of pediatrics within the endocrinology department at UCSF. I want to make sure I get this right. He's also the director of weight assessment for teen and children health. That's the WATCH program at UCSF. You know, I could read his bio. You've seen it all online. Just a couple of things that stood out to me about Dr. Lustig. First, he has had a tremendous influence on his research field. And I get the impression that you're only just getting started, but the stats are pretty phenomenal. He's written 85 peer-reviewed articles, 30 review articles. He's mentored upwards of 20 endocrine fellows. He's like, you know, sure. And he has patience. To top it all off, I'm not sure when the man eats or sleeps, but he's very, very busy and has clearly touched his research field in a really significant way. But beyond that, he has also started to engage with government, with society, and with families in the area of sugar. And he's starting to help us all think differently about the role that sugar plays in chronic disease, in the obesity epidemic. His YouTube video, 6 million views. It's Sugar, the Bitter Truth, right? And he's written a book. I think he's written a few books, but this is the one that I've read. This is the reason that my kids come home from birthday parties. They're 7 and 9 years old. They come home from birthday parties, and they delight in telling my husband and me, we made the healthy choice today at the birthday party. We didn't eat the cake. So, I'm not kidding. So thank you for having a positive influence, not only on my family, but I think it's going to be a positive influence on this audience too. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Robert Lustig.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank all of you for being here. And I truly apologize for taking all of the fun out of birthdays. You know, Stephen Colbert called me Dr. Buzzkill. I guess I should wear that with pride. First of all, I'm not really the anti-sugar guy. I'm the anti-processed food guy. And there's a very big difference, because processed food is actually the issue. When processed food entered the American lexicon back in the 1960s, that's when healthcare costs started to mount. And you can actually point the finger at exactly when this happened. It just so happens, though, that for the different abnormalities or the differences in processed food versus real food, we have the most data on sugar. And for sugar, we've actually been able to show causation as opposed to just correlation. And so it sort of is the marker for processed food. It's what the industry uses to make processed food palatable. So it is true, yes, we do have the data on sugar. Yes, I do talk about it. Yes, today is Sugar Savvy Day here at Berkeley. I'm very delighted to hear that. But it's really our processed food environment that has driven this. And when you realize, when you look at the side of a package, just how much sugar is in it and then how many other ingredients are in it, you will think twice about what you put on your table. So, first of all, I want to say that I have no disclosures except for this book, okay? But I didn't think that the book was a disclosure, but when we submitted our last paper, which we'll talk about in a minute, the editor came back and said, you have a potential conflict of interest. I said, we don't take any money from the food industry. I very specifically don't. And he says, well, you wrote a book. I said, well, you can't get all this information into a journal article. They won't let you. He said, well, it doesn't matter. It's still a conflict of interest. So anyway, that's my conflict of interest. So why sugar and why now? You know, this argument has been going on for a while. And I want to play you a clip from now 46 years ago that sort of sums up our understanding of this. And I think you'll find it very useful. Here we go.
As you know, there are reports citing possible links between sugar and heart disease, diabetes, obesity, tooth decay, hypertension.
Yes.
All the diseases that are epidemic in the population.
Right.
Now, sugar alone, I know, is not responsible for any of these diseases, but certainly the risks associated with a high consumption of sugar are demonstrably large.
I'd have to disagree. The risks associated with a high consumption of calories are demonstrably large, but not with sugar.
So that was then. Fred Stair, probably the most influential nutritionist, the head of the nutrition department at the Harvard School of Public Health. By the way, since that time, a lot has come out about Dr. Stair, including all of the money that he took from industry, to the tune of about $5 million. But things have progressed, haven't they? We're now 46 years later. So I found this next tidbit on the web, and I think you'll appreciate this as well.
Could eating a lot of sugar actually cause my diabetes?
Eating a lot of sugar definitely does not cause diabetes if you don't eat so much sugar that you gain weight. And in fact, sugar to a certain extent is okay because it stimulates the pancreas to make more insulin, which actually helps control the blood sugar. And so actually you need a certain amount of carbohydrate in your diet to have your pancreas working normally. What I always tell people is that, especially if you're at risk for diabetes, so, you know, I have people tell me all the time that, I've got a family history of diabetes, so I watch how much sugar I eat. And I say that that's not the right focus. The focus for you should be to make sure you keep your weight down. Because people who have a family history of diabetes, if they stay thin, have no more risk of diabetes than the general population. But if they become overweight, then their risk is 10 times higher than in the general population. So you can make a difference of 10-fold in your risk of diabetes if you've got a family history. If you stay thin, it's good. If you gain weight, it's bad.
So we haven't progressed very far in 46 years between Dr. Stair and Dr. Kahn, who, by the way, runs the Joslin Diabetes Center at Harvard. So it's about the calories. It's about the obesity. Or is it? So I'm going to provide you with data now to refute this argument. And you tell me, or you'll judge which one makes more sense. So on this slide here, we have the obesity prevalence country by country for the entire world. And on the y-axis, we have the diabetes prevalence country by country for the entire world. And what you can see is, well, there's very clearly a correlation. Indeed, there is. I don't argue that. There is a correlation between the two. But they're not concordant. That is, there are countries that are obese without being diabetic, such as Iceland, Mongolia, Micronesia. And there are countries that are diabetic without being obese, such as India, Pakistan, and China. India and China today have a 12% diabetes prevalence. 12. We are the fattest nation on the earth, and our prevalence is only 9.3%. How come they have a higher diabetes prevalence than we do if it's just about the calories and the obesity? Another piece of data. This just came out last year, and it shows the secular trend in diabetes amongst US adults. Okay, so here's the total right here going up, as you can see. And on this side, we have them stratified by degree of adiposity. So this is obese, this is normal weight, in the middle is overweight. And what you'll notice is that there is a 25% increase in the prevalence of diabetes amongst the obese. But there is also a 25% increase in the prevalence of diabetes amongst normal weight people. If it's about obesity, then how do you explain that? What I'm going to try to do today is dissociate the effect of the compound from the compound, if you will. Okay? So we all know that this stuff over here is both toxic and addictive, and we do something about it. My question for you today is this true as well? Okay? Now, a lot of the information that you can share with your friends and colleagues are in these two relatively easy to read tomes that you can find online very easily. This is called Is Sugar Toxic? From the New York Times Magazine, 5 years ago now, written by Gary Taubes, who now lives here in Berkeley, about our research at UCSF at the time. And this was our Nature comment that I wrote with Laura Schmidt and Claire Brindis, my colleagues from the Institute for Health Policy Studies over at UCSF, called The Toxic Truth About Sugar, where we actually lay out the argument for regulation. Now, you will say to me, oh, come on, Dr. Lustig, are you kidding me? Sugar? Really? It's natural. It's been with us for thousands of years. We need sugar to live, all sorts of things like this. Do you really mean this? Aren't you really just guilty of hyperbole? Well, I'm going to go there with you. Okay, let's see. So this concept that sugar could be toxic has drawn a lot of fire and a lot of criticism from the nutritional community. Here's an example. Misconceptions about fructose-containing sugars and their role in the obesity epidemic. Now, I want to point out, obesity is underlined, and that's very specific, because every time the food industry talks about this issue, they talk about the obesity epidemic. And the reason is because the data on sugar and obesity is actually pretty weak. It's true, but the significance is questionable. In fact, the meta-analyses say that sugar contributes about 0.8 BMI points. But we have a 7 to 8 BMI point problem. So sugar's worth about 10% of that. The rest of our diet is worth the other 90% of that. So in fact, while significant, it's not even a major factor in our causes for gaining weight. So they like to focus on obesity as being the issue. And this is a quote from that article. To say that sugar is toxic is a total misconception of the nature of the molecule. If you have too much oxygen, it is toxic. If you get too much water, you have water intoxication. That doesn't mean we say oxygen is toxic. Well, actually, they're correct. Water can be toxic, oxygen can be toxic, but there's no abuse potential. So for something that is toxic and abused, then we have an issue. And who is it that is saying these things? Well, here are the three authors, and here are their conflicts of interest, okay? All taking money. So let's talk about this concept of toxicity. because that's really what this is about. This is the definition right out of the dictionary. If anyone has a problem with this definition, let's talk about it now, because I'm going to use this definition as we go. The degree to which a substance can damage an organism. Anybody got a problem with that definition? Now, notice that this definition does not distinguish acute toxicity from chronic toxicity. So we have things that are acutely toxic, like sarin or ricin or cyanide, keel over and die, parts per billion, keel over and die right then and there. Okay? We know those are toxins. That's easy. But what about chronic toxins, like heavy metals or arsenic or, for that matter, tobacco smoke? One cigarette doesn't kill you, but 10,000 might. So the question is long-term or chronic toxicity. That's what we're talking about today. Now, the FDA regulates things that are acutely toxic, but their charter is specifically designed to avoid the issue of chronic toxicity, and we can talk about the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act of 1938 later if you like. Now, for me to demonstrate toxicity, I have to demonstrate the following 4 requisites. That is, that sugar is an independent risk factor, that it is exclusive of its calories, unrelated to any weight gain that might occur, and correlation is not enough. I must establish causation. Everybody with me? So I'm going to fight this fight with one hand tied behind my back. Now, there are lots and lots of critics, you've just met 3 of them, who say, well, these studies are all done in animals, they're not human studies. You have to give an enormous amount of the sweet molecule in sugar called fructose in order to see any of these negative effects. So I'm going to limit my discussion today to human data only, human consumption only, and in doses routinely ingested by humans. So I'm going to tie my other hand behind my back, and I'm going to headbutt you into submission. The bottom line, a calorie is not a calorie. It is not about the calories, and I will show you why it is not about the calories in a moment. Number 1, the way the liver metabolizes the chemical fructose, the molecule that's sweet, the reason we love it so much, is completely different from that of what we do with glucose, and I will show you that in semi-exhausting detail in just a moment. In addition, fructose, that sweet molecule of sugar, is 7 times more likely to cause the aging reaction than is glucose. And I'll show you why that is in a moment. Fructose stimulates the reward center of the brain, and glucose doesn't. So it's the drug of abuse, if you will. It's the thing that keeps you coming back for more. And lastly, chronic fructose exposure alone promotes all of the diseases of metabolic syndrome, unrelated to its calories and unrelated to its effects on adiposity. So, in order for me to show this, I have to give you just a little soupçon of science, and I try to do that right now. So, this is a liver cell, and imagine that you consumed a bolus, 120 calories of glucose, say, half cup of rice. Okay? Something you do at the Chinese restaurant every day. So what happens to those 120 calories of glucose? Because that's what starch is glucose. Turns out 80% of it will be metabolized by all the organs in the body because every cell on the planet can utilize glucose for energy. Glucose is so goddamn important that if you don't consume it, your body makes it. It's called gluconeogenesis. It's a process that your liver uses to turn protein into glucose, to turn fat into glucose. So, civilizations that don't have carbohydrate available to them, for instance, say, the Inuit, or the Rendili, or the Tokelau, or the Maasai, they're consuming whale blubber, or animal blood, or, meat only. They don't have carbohydrate to consume. They still have a serum glucose level. Where'd they get it from? They got it because they turned the fat or the protein into glucose. So, is glucose a nutrient? Sure. Is glucose an essential nutrient? Do you need it to live? Well, you need it in your blood to live, but do you need to consume it to live? And the answer is no, because you can make it. And if you can make it, it's not essential. So it's a nutrient, it is not an essential nutrient. Everybody got the picture? Okay. It is an energy source, and we do other things with it. Excuse me. So glucose is, for lack of a better word, good. Now let's talk about another energy source. Can you name an energy source that is not necessary for life, that there's no biochemical reaction in the body that requires it, that is clearly not nutrition by anybody's stretch of the imagination, that when consumed in excess is toxic to cells, organs, and humans, and kills, and we love it anyway, and it's addictive? Thank you, ethanol. Exactly right. Alcohol. Alcohol is not necessary for life. 40% of Americans are teetotalers, and as far as I know, there's nothing wrong with them. Maybe missing out on a little fun, but that's about it. Okay, no biochemical reaction that requires it. You do not have to have ethanol in your diet. It's certainly not nutrition, and it's a toxin. And we regulate it as such because it is both toxic and addictive, and we know it. And we keep it out of the hands of children for that reason. Everybody with me so far? So here's how alcohol is metabolized. Turns out, when you consume 120 calories in alcohol, say a shot of Maker's Mark, like me, 80% of it will go to the liver. And in the liver, you'll notice that it comes straight down here to this little subcellular structure here called the mitochondria, okay, without stopping and passing go and collecting $200. And what happens is that the mitochondria become overwhelmed. They can't burn it fast enough as it's coming in, and so the mitochondria will throw this byproduct off called citrate, and the citrate will then serve as the substrate for this reaction that occurs in orange. And that reaction is called de novo lipogenesis, new fat making. And this is how you get alcoholic fatty liver. And you'll notice at the end of that is something called VLDL, that's triglyceride. And then the triglyceride will get exported out, and that is what causes the dyslipidemia, the hypertriglyceridemia of alcohol abuse. So that can either serve as a nidus for heart disease or, for that matter, obesity. Everybody with me so far? So engaging in de novo lipogenesis is not a good thing to do. And it actually hurts your liver, and when your liver gets hurt, bad things happen. And this is ultimately all about your liver. Now let's look at fructose, okay, that sweet molecule in sugar. Notice, if you consume 120 calories in, say, sucrose, so an 8-ounce glass of orange juice, so half of it's glucose, half of it's fructose, 50-50. If you consumed 120 calories in a soda, then it would be 55-25, 55 fructose. So it would be more like 65 calories in fructose instead. But basically, you know, give or take, for government work, about the same. Okay? The whole fructose load ends up in the liver because only the liver has the transporter that's exclusive for fructose called the GLUT5 transporter, or the GLUT8 transporter now we know as well. But it's also only in the liver. So the fructose load goes to the liver and, notice, goes straight down to the mitochondria, just like alcohol did. The mitochondria can't handle the bolus, and so you end up with that same citrate, and you end up with the same hypertriglyceridemia, and you end up with the same problem in terms of export, and you might even have some that will precipitate out. Now you've got a lipid droplet. Now you've got non-alcoholic fatty liver disease instead. And you'll notice that a lot of other things go on, including inflammation, insulin resistance, which drives metabolic disease, hypertension over here, and also hyperglycemia in terms of risk for diabetes. That's metabolic syndrome. So without getting too into the weeds, all of the diseases of metabolic syndrome are at least exacerbated, if not initiated, by excessive fructose consumption, which comes from our sugar consumption, which comes from our processed food diet. Everybody with me so far? Now, this is mechanism. This is not proof yet. We're getting there. So that's one problem, is this de novo lipogenesis, this liver fat making. There's a second problem. Here are 5 pictures of edible substances. They all share one thing in common. What is it? They are all brown. They're all brown. Okay? Common link. Brown. Okay? It's the Browning reaction. It's also known as the Maillard reaction. It's also known as the aging reaction. This is what is happening to you as we speak. This is how bananas brown. Okay? Everybody got it? So it's a non-enzymatic linkage of a sugar to a protein, and it doesn't come off. So here's the way to think about it. You can either roast your meat at 375 degrees for an hour, or you can roast your meat at 98.6 degrees for 75 years. The answer is the same, you're browning, okay? You're browning right now, and if you had orange juice this morning, you're browning 7 times faster, okay? And if you don't believe me, here's newborn rib cartilage, nice and white, and here's 88-year-old rib cartilage, nice and brown, okay? If I opened you up right now, I guarantee you it would be brown. And how brown you are is how quick you will die. Now, how does this happen? So, for the biochemists in the room, you take the aldehyde group of glucose and you bind it to this amino group of lysine on position 1 of the hemoglobin molecule, and you end up with this thing called a Schiff base. It's an intermediate, and then spontaneously decomposes to form this covalent linkage. So all carbohydrates do this, but they do it with different rates and different affinities. Okay? And every time that this reaction occurs, whether it's glucose doing it or whether it's fructose doing it, you throw off a superoxide radical. It's known as oxidative stress, a reactive oxygen species, basically hydrogen peroxide. Now, you've all used hydrogen peroxide on wounds to clean the wound, right? You get the bubbling and all that, right? And that's great if you're trying to kill bacteria. Okay? And that's great if you're doing it on the outside on your skin. But what if you're doing that inside in your cells? Maybe not so good. Well, that's what's happening. Every time you consume a carbohydrate, this process is going on, bar none. But fructose does it 7 times faster and releases 100 times the hydrogen peroxide that glucose does. Why? Well, you have to look at the molecule. You have to look at, remember, this is not about the calories, it's about the molecule itself. And here's why. So here's glucose over here, here's glucose over here, here's glucose over here. The linear form, the ring form, and the space-occupying model for those of you who had Biochem 101. Take a look at the ring form and the space-occupying model for a moment. 6-membered ring, this hydroxymethyl group's sitting up here, not bothering anybody. For lack of a better word, this is a happy compound. It likes to live like this. It likes to live in the ring form, where it can't do any damage. So, at pH 7.4, 37 degrees, 99.2% of your glucose in your body is in this ring form where it can't do any damage. But it's in equilibrium with this linear form over here at 0.8%. Everybody with me so far? And that aldehyde group over here is the reactive thing that can bind to proteins and cause that Maillard or Browning reaction. And every time it does, you're aging. So you want to keep that in the ring form as long as you can, and as much as you can, because every time that reaction occurs, you age a little bit more. Everybody with me so far? Okay. Now let's look at fructose down below. Here's fructose, linear form. Here's fructose, ring form. And here's the space-occupying model. Notice, look at the ring form. 5-membered ring. 2 hydroxymethyl groups sitting axially in the same direction, button heads. So we've got allosteric interactions and ionic strain on this 5-membered ring to break it apart. And so at pH 7.4, 37 degrees, 97% exists in the ring form, 3% exists in the linear form, and this reactive keto group over here is just as reactive as this reactive aldehyde group over here. Causes the same problem, causes the same reaction, binds to the same epsilon amino groups of lysine, and causes the same aging reaction, except 7 times faster. And if you don't believe me, you can do this at home, okay, with your home chemistry set. Take a test tube, okay, add some albumin, some protein to the test tube, add either a glucose solution or a fructose solution, either one, okay, and cap it and put it in the sunlight. And every day, come back and stick it in your home spectrophotometer and measure the fluorescence. Okay, and this is how fast the glucose reaction occurs, and this is how fast the fructose reaction occurs. 7 times faster, 100 times the number of oxidative species, the things that like hydrogen peroxide. Everybody got it? So this stuff is inherently problematic. The third problem. Anybody know what this is? Anybody have children? Anybody have newborn boy children? This is called sweeties. This is a super concentrated sucrose solution that we dip the pacifier in and stick in the newborn boy's mouth before we do the circumcision. The Jews have wine. The rest of you have sweeties. It's the same thing. Why? Because it releases endogenous opioids within the reward system of the brain. In other words, it is a fomenter of reward. And anything that foments reward also has an addictive capacity. Any substance of abuse stimulates the same dopamine system in the brain and in the extreme causes tolerance and ultimately addiction. And so does sugar. And we have the data to support that now. In fact, National Geographic said, we can't resist it. Indeed, we can't. So that's the mechanism. Now I have to show you the data. Okay, remember, it's about the science. And I wouldn't be standing up here if we didn't have proof. And I have to show causational proof, right? So let's start with some correlational proof first, and we'll get into the causation at the end, okay? Let's start with diabetes. So this is a study that was done out of Europe. It's called the EPIC Interact study. It's a lot like the European version of the NHANES database, which we collect every 2 years, and it's supposed to basically give us what's going on in terms of trends for health and disease and nutrition in the United States population. And what they asked the question 3 years ago now is, do sugared sweetened beverages, SSBs, soda, energy drinks, sports drinks, etc., do those predict diabetes occurrence? Well, they have to take into account the calories, EI, energy intake, and they have to take into account the obesity, BMI. Everybody with me? So they've adjusted for energy intake and BMI in this model, and what they showed is every sugar-sweetened beverage consumed per day increases risk for diabetes by 29%. That's for one sugar-sweetened beverage per day. But we in America, we don't consume 1, we consume 2.5. So take that up to 68% for us. This is a meta-analysis where they looked at sugar-sweetened beverages and they also looked at fruit juice separately. Okay? It just came out recently. And they showed that even after adjusting for adiposity and calories, sugar-sweetened beverages still had a significant effect on risk for diabetes. And guess what? So did fruit juice. And they actually took into account industry-sponsored studies and subclassified them differently, appropriately so. And this is a study that hasn't actually been printed yet. It's our study that we did with my colleague and my dietitian and my grad student and former MPH at Berkeley student Luis Rodriguez as first author. This was his master's thesis, where we took the NHANES adolescent database and we looked at all 7,000 children that were in that NHANES database, and we categorized the added sugar in their diet, excluding fruit, just added sugar in their diet, controlling for adiposity and controlling for weight, and asked the question, does added sugar predict metabolic syndrome unrelated to calories or weight? Here's the first quintile, the lowest quintile, and here are the fourth and fifth quintiles, and you can see a 10-fold increase in risk for metabolic syndrome in these normal, otherwise normal adolescents. Okay? Now let's go further. Let's look at a different way of analyzing data. It's called an econometric analysis. This is also our work from Sanjay Basu, who is now down at the Stanford Prevention Institute when he was a resident at UCSF. What we did was we took 3 databases and melded them together. The first one, the Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO Statistics Database, FAO Stat, which lists country by country for the whole world, year by year, line by line, the foods that are available, not consumed, but available within a country. And we listed 7 different lines: total calories, fruits excluding wine, oils, fiber-containing foods, meat, cereals, and sugar, sugar crops, and sweeteners as separate line items. We then melded that with the International Diabetes Federation statistics database for diabetes prevalence, country by country, for the same length of time, 2000 to 2010. We then melded that with the World Bank Gross National Income database to control for the 5 confounders: poverty, urbanization, aging, physical activity, and obesity. Now remember, this is availability, not consumption, because everyone lies. So you can't even get a consumption that makes sense. This is just availability, so we don't have to worry about lying, okay? We don't have to worry about misclassification, because it's just what's in the country itself. During that decade, diabetes prevalence rose from 5.5 to 7%. That's a 35% increase in just one decade alone for the whole world. That's pretty severe. That's pretty sick when you think about it, because that's money going out the window for all of these countries. And when we modeled each of those line items, turned out there was only one signal. Everything else was a complete and utter zero, except for sugar. And there's the diamond, and there's the identity line, and you can see how significant that was. Here's the adjusted association of sugar with diabetes prevalence, country by country, for all 175 countries. Here's your take-home. This is the one you need to remember. Only changes in sugar availability predicted changes in diabetes prevalence. Only sugar, nothing else. For every extra 150 calories per person that were available per day in any given country, diabetes prevalence went up a total of 0.1%. Nothing. If it was the calories, that should have gone up. 0.1%, really? But if those 150 calories happened to be a can of soda instead, diabetes prevalence went up 11-fold, 1.1%. And again, we're not consuming 1, we're consuming 2.5. So take that up to 2.4%. Considering we have a diabetes prevalence in America of 9.3%, that means that 29% of our diabetes burden today is explained by sugar and sugar alone. 25% for the whole world. You want something to work on? You want something to target? There it is. Now let's move to this fatty liver issue that I mentioned before, because when your liver gets sick, all hell breaks loose. Turns out liver fat is the primary driver of this thing called insulin resistance, which is the nidus of this thing called metabolic syndrome we've been talking about. It has to do with the liver, okay? And I'll show you that. So here's normal liver over here under the microscope. These are sinusoids between the Kupffer cells and the bile canaliculi, and here are the little macrophages here that are embedded within the bile duct structure. This is all good. And over here, this is fatty liver disease. And you can see the vesicles of fat globules that are sitting in there, and you can see the inflammatory cells all moved in and the beginning of scarring. So my question to you is, what did it? Is that alcoholic fatty liver disease, or is that non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? Was it alcohol that did that, or was it sugar that did that? You can't tell. Not under the microscope. They look exactly the same. In fact, we've done now 4 liver transplants over at UCSF on 15-year-old 400-pound soda drinkers. Okay? Not alcohol, no alcohol. Okay? And it makes sense that this should be true, because after all, where do you get alcohol from? Fermentation of sugar. It's called wine. We do it in Napa and Sonoma every day. The big difference between alcohol and sugar is that for alcohol, the yeast does the first step of metabolism called glycolysis. For fructose, we do our own first step. But after that, once the mitochondria get it, they don't care where it came from. And so you get the same diseases of mitochondria. And that's why children today are suffering 2 diseases they never saw before, and they just both happen to be the diseases of alcohol: type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease. So children get the diseases of alcohol without alcohol. But I personally would rather have alcohol, because you can only drink yourself under the table once a day. It turns out that that fatty liver disease is the liver manifestation of metabolic syndrome. This is what the liver does when it has metabolic syndrome. And it's concordant with all of the other features of metabolic syndrome: large waist, high glucose, low HDL, high triglycerides, high blood pressure. Okay? And it's true for adults, and it's true for kids as well. And yes, it's made worse by obesity, but it happens even in normal weight people. And it is a primary predictor of type 2 diabetes. So when you have fatty liver disease, you are 3.5 times more likely to develop diabetes because you had fatty liver disease. So here's how you should think about it. And this is very important that you understand this. Here's a fat person. Notice the love handles on both sides. But I want you to take a look at this fat person's liver. Dark. 2.6% liver fat. This is okay. This person here is healthy. He's fat and healthy. He has what we call MHO, metabolically healthy obese. This person will live a completely normal life, die at a completely normal age, not cost the taxpayer a dime. He's just fat. Okay? Nothing wrong with this guy. We actually study these people to try to figure out how come there's nothing wrong with these guys. Because, you know, if we could figure out why they're protected, we could actually apply that to the sick population, right? So we care about these people. MHO, metabolically healthy obese. Turns out 20% of the obese population are metabolically healthy obese, 20%. Now here's more like what you would normally expect. So here's an obese person. There are the love handles. Take a look at this guy's liver. 24%, way worse. Ground glass appearance. Everybody see it? Now, this guy's got metabolic syndrome. This guy's got what you would think when you saw a fat person. Everybody got it? This guy's going to die. What about this guy? This guy's thin. Notice, no love handles. But take a look at his liver. This person is just as sick as this fat person. Thin sick, not fat sick. And we actually have a name for this now. It's called Tofi, T-O-F-I. Thin on the outside, fat on the inside, real medical terms, swear to God. Look it up in Medline. So my question to you today, looking around here, I don't see too many fat people, but are you a Tofi instead? How would you know? How could you know? Is there a way of knowing? And if you knew, would you do something about it? Turns out that liver fat matters. That liver fat actually matters more than any of the other fat. So many studies have shown that the visceral fat, the belly fat, is more important than the subcutaneous or the big butt fat. So there's big belly fat, there's big butt fat, right? Everybody knows the difference? Okay? The big butt fat, it's just ugly. But it's not dangerous. Okay? The belly fat, that's what matters. But it turns out, not so. That's what everyone thinks, but not so. This is a study done by Sam Klein's group at WashU St. Louis. And what they did, which was really quite ingenious for the time, was they took a whole bunch of fat people and flung them into an MRI scanner, and they measured, instead of subcutaneous big butt fat and visceral big belly fat, what they did was they looked at liver fat versus belly fat. Okay, everybody got it? Liver versus belly instead. So they then took those data and they did a multivariate linear regression analysis, holding either one constant. And what they showed was that when you held the liver fat constant, the visceral fat did not explain the changes in metabolic health. Whereas when you held the visceral fat constant, the liver fat, intrahepatic triglyceride, explained all the changes in metabolic health. In other words, it's the liver fat, people. That's what matters. And then the question is, okay, where'd the liver fat come from? So that's over here on the right side. Notice in gray right here, non-systemic fatty acids, non-systemic. Now we know where systemic fatty acids come from. They either come from your diet or they come from the breakdown of peripheral fat as you lose weight going to the liver. But where does non-systemic come from? Well, that's the fat that's made right there in the liver, de novo lipogenesis, new fat making. And that's the thing that drives this. So now let's get to causation. Okay, finally, all of that was just prelim, but now let's get to causation. So this is the study that came out from our group 3 months ago. You probably saw it in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle, et cetera, CBS News. Okay? What we did was we said, you know, we have all these fat, sick kids. If we get them to stop their sugar consumption, they will lose weight. And if they get better, people will say, well, of course they got better, they lost weight. So let's do a study where we don't let them lose weight. Let's take the sugar out of their diet, but substitute back something equicaloric, equally caloric, starch. Let's take the sugar out and put the starch in. So for 10 days, we took 43 children out of our clinic. And what we did was we substituted starch for sugar. We took the donuts out, we put the bagels in. We took the sweetened yogurt out, we put the baked potato chips in. We took the chicken teriyaki out, we put the turkey hot dogs in. Everybody got it? 10 days. They weighed themselves each day. And if they were losing weight, we said, eat more. Right? And then they came back 10 days later and we analyzed them again. Everybody got the picture? Okay. Now, as it turns out, they actually did lose a little weight, but it was a very small amount. It was only 0.9 kilos. They were 93 kilos to start with. And it turns out all the weight loss was actually in the first 4 days, it was water. Turned out it was water. It was not fat. We actually have the data that shows it's not fat. Here are their fasting labs. Everything got better. Their blood pressure went down by 5 points. Their blood glucose went down by 5 points. Their insulin went down by 25%. Their triglycerides went down by 46%. Their insulin area under the curve went down 57%. Okay? We also measured this de novo lipogenesis. So we actually gave them a tracer, C13 labeled acetate, to be incorporated into fatty acids. And we could measure those and see them coming out of the liver as triglyceride. And we measured them. We also measured their liver fat. So here's how fast their de novo lipogenesis changed. It got cut in half on the same number of calories in 10 days. Here's the triglyceride-rich lipoproteins before and after. This is the bad guy in terms of heart disease. Here's their glucose tolerance test, better. And here's their insulins on that glucose tolerance test. This is an insulin resistance curve because it doesn't come down, because the insulin's not working well enough, so it has to stay up. And you'll notice after 10 days at the same level of weight, they are now healthier. Okay? They are now clearing their insulin because it doesn't have to work as hard, because their livers are metabolically healthier. Here's subcutaneous fat. No change, because we didn't let them lose any weight. Here's their visceral fat. Here's their liver fat, which I'll talk about in a minute. Pancreatic fat. Now, you're not supposed to have fat in your pancreas, people. These kids had fat in their pancreas, and 3/4 of them, their fat disappeared. 3/4. Here's their subcutaneous fat, visceral fat down 7%. Here's their liver fat down 22% in just 10 days. And it turned out that the change in insulin sensitivity, which is their metabolic health, correlated with the change in their liver fat. And here's their change in their liver fat for those who had liver fat. Here's their change in insulin sensitivity. And we did that same analysis that Sam Klein's group did, liver versus visceral fat. Turned out the visceral fat explained none of the change. Only the liver fat did. And it was huge. It was enormous. Same concept. It was the liver fat that made the difference. And this is just to show there were no outliers. Now, just so you don't think I'm fructocentric, remember I started out by saying it's processed food that's the problem, not just sugar? There are actually 4 things in our diet that are metabolized the same way. 4 total, 4. Trans fats, but we know that and they're coming down. Branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, valine. These are what are found in corn-fed beef, chicken, and fish, not grass-fed, because it's what's found in corn. Well, that's our whole meat supply. Alcohol, but kids don't drink alcohol. And finally, fructose. Why? Because these 4 items are all metabolized the same way. They have 3 things in common. The liver is the only site of energy metabolism. They're not insulin regulated, and there's no glycogen pop-off to liver starch. The mitochondria get the whole bolus. They become overwhelmed. They throw off the citrate. It engages in de novo lipogenesis, causes that fat to be made, and makes you sick. And that's processed food right there. So in summary, I've shown you prospective correlational data that shows the association between sugar and, actually I didn't show you heart disease, just change that to diabetes, exclusive of calories or obesity. Econometric data which shows causal medical inference for sugar and diabetes, exclusive of calories or obesity. And finally, an interventional isocaloric glucose for fructose exchange, which showed improvements in all aspects of metabolic health without any weight loss, without any change in calories. And we did it in 10 days. 10 days. You know what that means? That means we could start being healthy tomorrow. How about even today? If you take the Sugar Savvy Challenge and keep it going, you will be healthier at the end of 3 weeks. And I'll even go so far as I promise it. How's that? So, is sugar public enemy number one? Trans fats used to be, but we know that. Trans fats are now off the generally recognized as safe list at the FDA as of 2013, and they're coming out of our diet. They were on the GRAS list for as long as there was a GRAS list, and it took the science to get them removed. It's time to do the same for sugar. Sugar is not a food. Sugar is a food additive. It is not nutrition. There's no biochemical reaction in the body that requires fructose. When consumed in excess, it causes cell, organ, and human damage, and we love it and it's addictive. It meets all the criteria of alcohol, and we give it to children and we don't care. We have to fix this. We have to stop this. We have to stop it now. There's only one answer: real food. That's what I'm for. I'm for changing the food supply. I'm for changing the subsidies. I'm for changing what's available. I'm for changing food deserts. I'm for changing the nutrition supplement program, the SNAP program. I'm for changing what's in schools. I'm for changing the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act. I'm for reducing consumption every which way, and any way it can happen, I'm for it. With that, I'm going to just run through these real quick because we don't have time. For those who want more information, you can watch Fed Up, which is a documentary about how we got to where we are today. A new Canadian documentary called Sugar Coated, which actually focuses on UCSF and Berkeley, which shows us why we got to where we are today, including the corporate malfeasance and the fraud and the public relations campaigns of the food industry. Fat Chance, as we mentioned before, and the Fat Chance cookbook, because 1/3 of Americans don't know how to cook. And if you don't know how to cook, you're hostage to the food industry for the rest of your life. And a PBS video we did called Sweet Revenge, which gives people information they need, and it's also in Spanish now. And lastly, we have started a nonprofit to take on big food. Nutritional, medical, and also legal services in the prosecution of this disaster that has befallen America and the rest of the world. With that, I want to thank my colleagues, my collaborators at UCSF, several of whom are here at UC Berkeley now, Chris Madsen and Barbara Laraya, Jean-Marc Schwartz, who used to be here at Berkeley as well. This, of course, is one of the major centers for nutrition and food science in the world, and I relish and value my association with it. And I'm glad that you all came today, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Well, you've clearly scared a few audience members.
Good.
Because there seems to be a theme to some of the questions. I'll start with a couple of easy ones. This is from an audience member. I'm a chocolate lover. I can certainly identify with this one. How bad is one small piece of chocolate per day?
If that's your only treat, have at it. It's because this is a dose issue, okay? If that's truly your only, if that's your only reward in life, if that's what makes you happy, fine. But to be honest with you, I'll bet you it's not just one, is it?
All right, we have a couple of other questions that are along these lines on things that's okay to eat and things that are not okay to eat. So what about fresh fruit?
Fresh fruit is fine because it has fiber.
Okay.
The fiber limits the rate of absorption from the gut into the bloodstream, and that actually keeps your liver healthy.
Okay. How about party sticks instead of soda? I'm not sure what a party stick.
I don't
oh,
either.
pixie stick.
Pixie
Sorry,
sticks.
a pixie stick. I don't know what either one is, but maybe
I know what
you
a pixie sticks are from my childhood.
Okay.
That's just straight sugar. It's just colored sugar. It's no better.
Okay, so that's not okay.
No.
How about, here's another one. This one is a little bit more nuanced. Is there a difference in how the body processes fake sugar versus real sugar?
So diet sweeteners, you're asking
That's
about
exactly
diet sweeteners.
right.
Everybody wants to know about diet sweeteners. Everybody. I never get out without somebody asking that question.
Well, I'm glad we haven't failed you.
Well, the answer is we don't know. That's the answer. Okay? And there are reasons we don't know. It's not because I don't know. It's because no one knows, because those studies haven't been done. There's a reason they haven't been done. Okay? Remember the FDA? Remember the Food, Drugs, and Cosmetics Act of 1938 that I mentioned? There's a lot wrong with that. It talks about acute toxicity. That's pharmacokinetics. So we have all the pharmacokinetics for all the diet sweeteners because that's what the FDA demands. That's how you get it on the market. You have to prove that there's no acute toxicity. That's pharmacokinetics. But then there's this other thing called pharmacodynamics. That's chronic toxicity. That's what happens long term. That's how a drug affects you long term. So the question is, what do any of these diet sweeteners do long term? We have no data. And there's a reason we don't have any data. It's because they don't have to supply it. So the food industry says, well, if the FDA is not asking for it, it can't help our sales. We've already gotten it approved. We're not going to do it. And then the NIH says, hey, food industry's compound, food industry's profit. We're not going to pay for it. So we got an FDA who doesn't ask for it. We got a food industry who won't do it. We got an NIH who won't pay for it. No data.
All right. We have a bunch of smart people in this room, as you probably are well aware.
Works.
So what effect does sugar have on brain function?
Right. So when we're talking dietary sugar, we're talking glucose, fructose. We're not talking about glucose, right? So glucose obviously is what the brain runs on. If you become hypoglycemic, you will have a seizure or die. Okay? You need glucose for brain function. Again, if you don't consume it, your body will make it. That's one of the reasons why your body will make it. Also, your brain is very adaptable to run on ketones, which is why the ketogenic diet works to help abolish seizures in children with chronic seizure disorders, which I take care of. Fructose. Fructose, turns out, there are GLUT5 transporters on astrocytes, not on neurons, but on astrocytes. And it looks like they destabilize neuronal membranes. And this is work from Fernando Gomez-Pinilla at UCLA. And it actually, there's indirect data that dietary sugar correlates with cognitive decline and depression. And there's a way around that. It's called omega-3 fatty acids. That's what omega-3s do, is they restore the elasticity and the distensibility and the membrane fluidity of those neuronal membranes that fructose actually damages. So the answer is dietary sugar does not do good things to your brain, but if you eat properly and you eat real food, that should be high in omega-3s because pretty much green leafy vegetables and plants and salmon have omega-3s. You will basically undo any of that damage.
Okay, ready? We're going to move on to the liver. Appropriately
It's my second favorite organ, like Woody Allen said.
So you have a few of us worried about the, what was the term that you used? The fat on the
fatty liver disease.
No, the fat on the outside.
Tofi.
And the
Tofi.
thin on the inside.
Tofi, right.
Or the outside and the inside. Anyway, how do we know if we've, is there a test to test the fat in our liver?
Yes. So the easiest way is a waist circumference. So if your waist circumference is greater than 40 inches for male, 35 inches for female, the chances that you have fatty liver are large. There are some easy lab tests that can be done by your physician. The easiest one and cheapest one being an ALT, alanine aminotransferase. It is part of a standard chem panel. The problem is that the reference range has crept up over the last 40 years since I've been a doctor. When I started in med school, the upper limit for ALT was 25. If you look at a standard lab slip now, the upper limit for ALT is 40. If you have an ALT of 40, you have fatty liver. Okay? 25 is the upper limit. The reason it's crept up is because everyone now has fatty liver, but they don't know it, so they appear normal, just the same way blood pressure's crept up, okay? Because the whole population has moved to the right. So if you've got an ALT over 25, it's highly sensitive for fatty liver. It's not specific, though, but it's a good place to start.
Okay. Question from the web.
Yeah, we have a question from the remote audience. Branched-chain amino acids are a common dietary supplement for athletes and weightlifters.
Yep.
Is that problematic given how they're metabolized?
Right, so everyone wants to know about that. So protein powder, the stuff that bodybuilders take, scoop out and put in their shakes and whatever, okay, that's branched-chain amino acids. That's leucine, isoleucine, valine. And you need those if you're building muscle. Okay, it's 20. Those 3 amino acids are 20% of muscle. So if you're building muscle, you need those. And so if you're a bodybuilder, great, fine, whatever, have at it. But if you're a mere mortal like me, what happens when you take on extra branched-chain amino acids? The only place to store it is muscle. So what if you're not building muscle? Where does it go? Well, it goes to the liver. And the liver then takes the amino group off through an enzyme called BCAT, branched-chain aminoacyl transferase. It then goes to alpha-ketoglutarate, enters the Krebs cycle, overloads the Krebs cycle and throws off the citrate, and now you've got liver fat accumulation. And this has been shown very nicely by Dr. Chris Newgard, who's the head of the Obesity and Nutrition Center at Duke. So basically, if you're a bodybuilder and you take protein powder, have at it. If you're not a bodybuilder, taking protein powder is counterproductive.
Okay, I think we have time for just maybe 2 more questions.
Sure.
This one's maybe one that you don't always get. Does this high consumption of fructose in children have any correlation or association with the trend in early onset of puberty that's been noticed?
So likely not because of the fructose per se. Certainly obesity drives this early puberty phenomenon. But fructose drives excess food consumption because that's where the food, that's what's in the food. So in that very indirect fashion, fructose can drive it, but not because of a specific effect on puberty. It would be mediated through excessive weight gain. And by the way, that's only true in girls, not in boys. And part of the reason that happens is not because puberty's really started, it's because breast tissue has started, because the adipose tissue has the enzyme aromatase, which takes adrenal androgens, converts it to estrogens. So everybody thinks puberty's starting early, but when you actually measure the LH and the FSH, which tell you about puberty, they're still low. So there's a lot of, shall we say, misinformation about puberty that's out there, including books that have been written on it. And as a pediatric endocrinologist, I'm about the data.
Okay. Last question. This one is about public policy, more broadly. So you mentioned that you're for a whole bunch of things.
I'm for anything that reduces consumption.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit more about some of the initiatives that you think do work? Which ones work best?
Well, I think that probably what we're going to find, because it's all trial and error ultimately, what we're going to find is that different initiatives and different policy levers will work in different populations, in different places at different times. So I'm not for any given one. Obviously, here in Berkeley, you passed a soda tax. Soda taxes are the easiest form of policy lever to institute because it doesn't cost anything to start it. It's a question of whether they work. Well, the Mexican data that just got released and was in BMJ said indeed it did work, but it worked mostly in the poorest people. Now, people say, that's regressive against the poor. The problem is diabetes is more regressive against the poor. So the question is, which way do you want that to go? And if the money's flowing back to the population that it came from in terms of services or in terms of better food supply, I think that's very valuable. And that's not what is happening in Berkeley. It's just going into general coffers. One of the reasons it didn't pass in San Francisco is because we had the money was going to be earmarked for programs, Park and Rec and fixing food deserts and things. And so we needed a higher threshold. We needed 67%. So I know that Supervisor Malia Cohen is now spearheading a repeat soda tax initiative to be on the ballot this November, which would only be a 50% plus one like you have here in Berkeley. Am I for it, against it? I'm neither. I'm not for it or against it. I'm for reducing consumption. In that it is an easy lever to pull for reducing consumption, well, then I'm for it. Okay, but really what I'm for is removing subsidies. Now, how easy is that going to be? You know, forget it. You know, the farm bill is like, you know, it's like dipped in, you know, in platinum. You know, nobody wants to touch the farm bill. It's the third rail of American politics. But right here at Berkeley, the Giannini group, the economic group here, in 2009 modeled what food prices would look like if we got rid of all food subsidies. And it turned out the price of food would not change except for one item. Sugar would go up 33%. Well, that's exactly what you want. So I think that removal of subsidies is exactly what we want, and that way it's about free markets and let the market do its job. Even the libertarians can get on board with that. The problem is that, you know, if you eliminate subsidies, you know, you've got a problem. You know, what's the dirtiest four-letter word in the English language? Iowa. Because that is the highest federal payments to gross income that there is Iowa. It's a big black hole. And nobody wants to piss off Iowa, as we just learned. Except Ted Cruz.
That could be an appropriate time to end. It may not be. I know you've got to see patients this afternoon.
I do.
So we're going to let you get to that. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
And all of you go out and be sugar savvy, not just today, but maybe for the rest of your life.
Hear, hear.
Good luck.
Thank you.